of Joy podcast. My name is Wanaka Oberhuber, and I'm your host. My guest today is David DeAndre. Hi.
Hi, thanks for having me on.
I'm so happy you're here, and we found a way to do this because we struggled with that a while.
Yeah, always a technical hurdle here and there, but let's hope this works.
So I promised you we'd do this, and so the time has come where we're actually fulfilling that.
Yeah, wonderful. It's a good time to do it. It's the perfect timing, in fact.
Yeah, I actually think that it was perfectly planned because now is the right time.
Exactly.
You just released your new book, and so it's all fresh in your mind, this whole process and all that you went through with it. So
exactly.
So let's start by, you would like to share a little bit about who you are just in general so that people have an idea about it. And then let's go into what has been moving you since we talked last time.
Okay, great. Okay, first for everyone just to see the book itself. It's called Tulip, the Poisonous Flower of Calvinism, which might surprise some of my friends why I wrote a book about Calvinism. But the lead up to writing the book really had a lot to do with my moving from Europe to Canada. And when I got here 5 years ago, I searched for meaningful work in universities locally, but I didn't get a lot of teaching. So to fill my time, I started to get active in discussion groups about A Course in Miracles and posting my thoughts, and then also posting my thoughts on my personal page on Facebook. And along the way, I made one post about Calvinism, and it got more comments and reactions than all of my posts about topics of the Course and self-healing and all this stuff. So I made another post about Christianity, and it started to really take off. So I had originally thought I would write a book about how to apply the principles of A Course in Miracles in my life and in anyone's life. But I found a way to talk about my upbringing and the belief system I had before I discovered A Course in Miracles, and how toxic it is to one's sense of self, view of self, to one's emotional well-being, etc. And that was my angle, to sort of weave my story in with more scholarly, let's say, academic type analysis of the 5 tenets of Calvinism, which are total depravity, unconditional election, limited atonement, irresistible grace, and perseverance of the saints. There are those people who don't know that TULIP is an acronym for that, but those are the 5 major chapters in the book. And then I have a parallel structure where I tell where I was at various stages of my life and understanding and awareness of the principles of healing that I learned in the Course and in other places as well, other great healing sources like Byron Katie, for example. I really like her thing called The Work, which helps you identify your guilt projections, in fact. So that can be very helpful in tandem with the Course's teaching about guilt projection. And I put one of those that I discovered in the book that I was projecting onto one of my colleagues. And it was a real discovery for me. And once you discover one, and you find yourself making negative judgments about other people, you can ask yourself, well, am I actually projecting something inside me onto them? And bit by bit, you uncover areas in yourself that need work. But that's how the book started to take shape. But the first year, I started on January 1st, 2020. So I started writing on January 1st, 2020, and finished the entire first draft on January 1st, 2021. And by that time, I realized that the early chapters just don't match the later chapters. I started to get into a groove halfway through, or a little bit later than that. And so I had to go back and work on the beginning. And once I started back on the beginning, then I worked my way through the entire book, the manuscript again, until I had something that I felt I could now present to publishers. That took another year. And then, you're working sort of in a vacuum, and you don't know if anyone will want to read your book or if a publisher will want to publish it. So you have moments of self-doubt, and you're not really sure where things are going, but you keep plugging away. And there was a marvelous thing that happened during this process. I was just wondering about all this, and I asked the universe or Jesus to give me a sign. Is everything okay? And I went for my daily walk, and there on a tree, just 2 meters away from me, was a beautiful pileated woodpecker. It's the larger woodpecker. It's like the Woody Woodpecker cartoon. And I've only seen one of those about half a dozen times in my life. And there it was, so close to me, I could almost touch it. And I could watch it working. It was just pecking and pecking and pecking, diligently plugging away. You probably know where this is going. But, and I said to myself, okay, that was good, but I was really hoping to see an eagle or something spectacular. And I could sort of feel Jesus laughing at me, like, okay, right? But when I got home, I understood that the woodpecker was the perfect sign, that's the writer's process. You just write one good paragraph at a time, one good sentence, and follow it up with another good sentence. And by the end of each day, you might have a page or two of really good material that's solid. You look at it again the next day, then you start over again. And the woodpecker has to really work hard and be patient to get that little treat inside the tree. So I understood that the sign was perfect. So I went for my walk the next day. And what do I see? Circling over my head was a golden eagle. So I think there's a lot of, Jesus has a good sense of humor. And those people who are students of the course will understand what I'm talking about. I think other people who come at it without that knowledge might think I'm a bit off the wall at this point, and they might stop watching the podcast. But course students understand what I'm saying. And there's all those stories where Jesus is telling Helen and telling her certain things, and he has a wonderful sense of humor, and he knows how to joke around with her all the time. So I experienced that, I think, in a little way on those 2 days. But for people who don't really know who I am and are wondering why would I write a book about Christianity, first of all, I'm a preacher's kid. My father was a Baptist minister, so I grew up in the church. And unlike a lot of preacher's kids, I didn't have any problem being a preacher's kid. In fact, I really liked it. I felt like I was the star, the first child of the preacher. I had sort of kind of a star status and received so many nice gifts and kindnesses from the members of the church. And I didn't have a problem with that. I didn't rebel about that. That's really not an issue. After I finished high school, the natural thing for me to do was to go to Bible college. And I went to Philadelphia College of Bible. And there I started out as my major was sort of generalized, but I thought that I would become a youth pastor or something in the church. I wasn't quite sure. But during that first year, I was on the basketball team, and another guy on the basketball team was a music major. And what we like to do on road games, wherever we would be changing, there was often a piano somewhere nearby, and I would play a little ditty on the piano and try to do a little rock and roll thing or boogie woogie, you know, nothing special, but mess around on the piano. So this guy on the team, he told the piano professor that there was a guy on the basketball team who might be a good candidate to be a music major. I don't know why. I never thought about it. So the piano professor, who was highly revered by everyone, he was, I don't know if I can mention his name. Am I allowed to mention his name? It's okay. His name was Sam. All right. He was Chinese. He was a child prodigy. And his family was helped by missionaries to escape communist China. And they relocated in Philadelphia, and he went to my college. Later, he went on to go to Juilliard, studying with one of the greatest piano teachers in the 20th century. Her name was Rosina Levine. She was described by Time magazine as the greatest piano teacher in the 20th century. So he studied with her. And he also studied with a musicologist, Carl Geiringer, at UC Santa Barbara. He was an expert in Bach and Brahms, which is maybe dear to your heart like it is mine. But anyway, so I really respected him, but he kept saying, "You play for me, and I want to hear you play." But I thought it was a joke because I couldn't really play anything. People who know about Christian music at the time might have heard of someone called Keith Green, and he was a pianist, sort of like a Christian Elton John type. And I couldn't play much more than that. I had never really studied piano seriously, just had a few lessons throughout the years. So finally, to get him off my back, I played a little Keith Green thing for him, and I thought that would be the end of it. And he got very serious, and he did one of his long pauses like he would do. And he said, "Well, I'm going to tell you this, and anytime I've told someone this, I've never been wrong. And what I'm going to tell you is, I can make you, if you let me, I can make you be the best music major in this college." And I was just stunned. I was floored. I couldn't believe it. And he gave me time to think about it. And I really had to think deeply about it because I knew it would be a different direction in my life. And I had a girlfriend back home at the time, and I just had a feeling that the type of dedication that becoming a music major would require would maybe complicate things with us. And in the end, I decided to become a music major. I couldn't resist that offer. It was just so wonderful. It was so exciting. And yeah, I ended up breaking up with my girlfriend a year later because there was too much. It was a long distance relationship at the time, and not like today. There were no smartphones and internet and all that. So I became a music major. The reason I'm telling you all that is that music majors at our college were in a separate building, and we all had a slightly cynical streak about pastoral majors, people going into the other part of the ministry. We were all preparing to go into church music. Well, in my case, I did a special study program to become a concert pianist, which I didn't end up doing, but we had sort of a different alternative take on things. And Sam taught me how to think independently. He would never tell me what type of interpretation to take of a Beethoven sonata or whatever it might be. He would ask me to go deep inside myself and find what works for me. So essentially, he gave me the tools to pick up something later, and that was to question everything that I had ever been taught or believed. I didn't know A Course in Miracles at the time, and when I read those lines in the Course that said, "You have been poorly taught, and you need to recognize that you've been poorly taught," I didn't really start questioning things right away. When I graduated from Bible college, I got a full-time job working as a minister of music in the Philadelphia area. And it was a good offer, and I didn't really think I wanted to work in the church per se like that by that time, but it was an exciting place to be. It was a growing church, and there was a very dynamic minister. So I went there, and there I met my future wife at that church. But also there I was sent by the church for training sessions and seminars. We weren't too far away from Princeton University, and there's a wonderful college there, the Westminster Choir College, where you can learn how to be a good conductor, to learn how to make good vocal production. So I was directing a church choir, several choirs, and those were very helpful things. And the church had a lot of money, and they sent me to Florida to Fort Lauderdale, to the Coral Ridge Presbyterian Church, which had a giant church music. It was called Church Music Explosion, a big workshop over several days where all the musicians, church musicians from around the country went, because Coral Ridge had a giant music program. First of all, they had a choir with 200 people in it and an orchestra, and one of the largest organs in the world in there. It was just fabulous. And the director himself, his name was Roger. He was a very dynamic director. And so the church sent me down there. People might have heard of Coral Ridge from Dr. James Kennedy. He had something, he developed a program, an evangelism program at Coral Ridge, which started to be imitated all over the country. And in fact, our church in Pennsylvania adopted it. And it was to get people to come into the church. You would always ask them a leading question. You go door to door and say, if you were to die tonight, where would you be? Or where would you go? Typical evangelistic Christian thing. But he built his church from just a few people to 7,000 members. Now, during that conference, I wanted to just soak in everything I could possibly soak in. And Roger was leading a rehearsal of the Brahms Requiem. And the full orchestra was on the platform, the giant choir. So what I did was, I was like a little mouse, and I snuck up and sat behind the pulpit. There were a couple benches behind the pulpit where you could sit. And from there, you could see everything happening. And I was watching the rehearsal, and all of a sudden, someone came in and stood at the pulpit. And I didn't know who it was, what it was. And that person started reading a text. It was like reading a text that was going to be associated with the concert coming up. And I recognized the voice. It was the stained glass voice of Dr. James Kennedy. It was him. And he sat down after he read on the bench opposite me. Our knees were practically touching. And there I am with this famous television preacher, and he's smiling at me and I'm smiling at him. It was a strange moment. And during a break in the rehearsal, Roger came over to the pulpit to talk to James Kennedy. And then he saw me, and I introduced myself. He introduced himself. Of course, I knew who he was. And right there, he said, hey, how are you getting home? How are you getting back to the airport? And I said, I don't know. He said, I'll take you. So I thought, okay. And he found out where I was. He said, oh, I'm going to Princeton this summer for the Robert Shaw workshop. And I said, I'm going to the workshop. He said, great. He says, we'll stay with you. I mean, all of a sudden, just like this, it was really quite a synchronicity, moment of synchronicity. So on the way to the airport a couple days later, he actually offered me a job. I had just started working at the church where I was. I didn't feel qualified or even inclined to switch yet or make a change. But again, I'm mentioning all this because Roger plays an important part later. He comes in later in my life. I was at the church where I was working a couple years and realized that being a minister of music wasn't for me. So I decided, and my wife graciously agreed, and she was enthusiastic, that I would go back to school. I would go to grad school and get a graduate degree in music history and pursue a career in academia. And I quit the church job. We moved close to her work and were able to sell one car and work it out financially. And I went to grad school. Well, at that moment, it was the first time in my life that I was not a professional Christian, not required to go to church, even though we kept going to church. We were still devout believers. But it dawned on me that maybe everything I believe is just because I was taught that as a child and just believed it, didn't ever question it. Why would you as a child? And I just kept believing it throughout all those years. And I decided to really explore, do those things work for me? Are they really true? And so I decided secretly, I didn't tell my wife at the time, I just decided I'm going to tear everything down and see what really works. And so I first tore down the idea that there is a God. Could I live in a universe where there is no God? And I explored that possibility. And the quick answer to that one is that doesn't work for me at all. As a classical musician, there are so many pieces in which I feel transport me to a transcendental experience, something, let's say, spiritual, but transcendental is a good word. For example, some of the symphonies by Mahler and the slow movement, especially the slow movement of the Sixth Symphony, that just takes me to another space entirely. And by the way, it was always my dream to hear the Vienna Philharmonic play Mahler in Vienna at the Musikverein. But it still hasn't happened. I have seen the Vienna Philharmonic on several occasions in Carnegie Hall and also in Brussels when I was living there. But now, along the way here, see, I was going to a secular university and making a lot of non-Christian friends. Now, when you grow up in the kind of environment that I grew up in, you didn't have any non-Christian friends. There was no way you were going to make one. I went to a normal secular high school and I was on the basketball team. So you could say, yeah, I had some non-Christian friends. But by the time I went to Bible college and then came home in the summers, all my friends were in my church. And then I got a job in a church. So everyone I knew was a Christian. And here at Temple University in Philadelphia, I started making friends who were not Christians, and they were very bright, witty, fun. And some of them were gay because I was in the music field. And I had always thought that they were probably deeply sinning or sinners and of the devil and all that at the time. And I found them to be just delightful. And they started opening up my mind that I thought, I need to question all this because it's just not the way I've been told. And along the way, I had some epiphanies. For example, that hell doesn't exist. The reason for that, I decided, had to do with Santa Claus. The way I figured out that Santa Claus wasn't real as a child, I looked up into the chimney of our house and realized no fat guy in a red suit could come down that chimney with a big bag of gifts. It didn't work for me. So I just decided that Santa doesn't exist. And when it came to hell, I realized that hell only works if you have a body. You need to experience the torture of the flames and the heat. Well, you need a body. And I thought, well, I'm not taking this body anywhere. So that didn't make any sense to me. But I had no real framework at the time to put all this together. And by the time I finished my master's degree, a master's degree was not enough to get an academic position. So I applied for doctoral programs, and I was accepted at Yale University for their doctoral program. And that's a pretty rigorous program, and it took me quite a while to complete my degree because during that time we started having a family and juggling the time and trying to get the time for the research and writing. There I learned a lot about writing as well, because it's a process. Those of who are listening, and you as well, you're working so much in the dark, and there's many days you feel it's completely futile. I was so depressed during those years. I thought I'm never going to finish this thing. And then what? I wanted to start a career and provide for the family and everything. And I remember being in the total darkest place, really dark. It was my birthday, and I was sitting in the undergraduate library just wondering what is going to happen. I don't know. And there my eye landed on a book on the shelf next to me. It was by Pierre Bourdieu, and it was about cultural capital. And he's a sociologist, a French sociologist, and he talked about the arts and how certain areas of the arts are considered more pure because they're not tainted by commercialism. And I was working on a topic of music theater and opera, and I couldn't put it all together, and that book helped me put it all together. So there it was, right on the shelf next to me. It was an amazing discovery. Again, a great example of synchronicity. I felt I was being guided there. And it took a couple more years to really flesh everything out and finish it. But by the time I finished, I was already 40 years old, and people who were younger were already writing articles and books. So I was behind the curve there. And all along that time, during those years, Roger kept calling me once a year, and he would say, "Hey, when are you going to come work for me?" Right? And I kept saying, "No, I'm working on a degree. I'm going to go into academia." And occasionally he would visit. And during those years, my Yale years, he actually relocated to Kiev, Ukraine, to work with a music program and humanitarian aid, and to establish a church there. And it was a very exciting thing. And he brought the choir and orchestra to New York City, and they did a concert at Carnegie Hall. And my wife and I went down to New York City and saw the concert. It was so exciting. Wow. And after that, they came up to visit with us, and they said, "You need to come to Kiev and be with us." And I kept thinking, it's impossible. I'm going on a different track. But what happened was, after I got my degree, jobs just did not open up very quickly. And I sent out lots of applications, and I was getting a lot of rejections. And so the idea of relocating to Kiev started to look more and more interesting. And I decided to go there for a couple weeks and just scope it out, check it out. And when I came back, I told my wife that we could probably make a life there and it would be okay. And it would be a very interesting adventure. But I didn't see myself as a missionary. And it was really a mission. And to get over there fully funded, I would have to present myself at churches like I was a missionary or a potential missionary. But by that time, I didn't feel that was really me, even though I had been a summer missionary many, many years before, a couple times. In any case, I felt deep down that I was being a bit of a fraud when I went to a church and said the right words and knew how to raise money, because you have to present a good program and all the rest. So we ended up getting fully funded, and we packed everything up and went to Kiev. And once I was there, it became clear to me that it really wasn't going to work for me. It was working very well for my wife because there was an aspect of the mission which involved medical aid and things, and she was a nurse. So she was thriving, and I was just drowning. I wasn't thriving at all. And the ugly part of my story, which I'm really not proud of, is that I started to have feelings for a woman who was in the organization. And because I was feeling so out of joint with everything else, this looked very attractive to me. And it went against everything I believed that I stood for in terms of integrity, honesty, fidelity, everything. And I knew I couldn't continue that way. It wasn't very long, but at a certain point I knew, no, I can't live a lie, and I need to come clean. So I got my wife together and Roger and his wife together. They sat in our living room, and I told them I'm leaving the mission and I'm leaving my marriage. And it was like, I can't believe I did it to this day. It was the most excruciatingly difficult thing to do, not only because of the need to make the decision, but knowing how many lives I was going to affect in a very painful way in the coming months and years. I'm a people pleaser, and it just made me feel terrible that this was the place I had to be and to make this decision. But I did it, and yeah, all hell broke loose for a while. And my wife took the children back to America, but she regrouped and she came back to Kiev. In the meantime, I got a job at a Christian university. This is the big irony. I got a job at a Christian university, which, by the way, the original parent university was in Vienna. It was called the International Christian University. And the director, leader, head of that university decided to found one with some missionaries in Kiev, the daughter university, let's call it. And I got the job initially to teach music appreciation, music history. And then they found out that I knew a lot about American literature. That was my minor in the graduate school. So they offered me to teach American literature. And then they found out that I have a degree in Bible. And they said, the missionary who's teaching the Bible has to go back to the States permanently. Could you teach the Bible courses? And I thought, oh, no. Well, I needed the money. I just didn't know what to do. Of course, I accepted. I know the Bible very well, but I didn't know how I was going to teach it. I just didn't know what to do. And I had to find a good approach that sat well with me as far as my integrity. The missionary's desire was to use the Bible courses as like a missionary endeavor to get the students to come to their church and to show them how the Bible is the true, inspired, infallible Word of God and all that stuff that we know, the standard doctrines. But I didn't believe any of that stuff, and I couldn't teach the Bible that way. So I read some books by John Shelby Spong, who's an Anglican bishop. And one of his books was Rescuing the Bible from Fundamentalism. And he presented another way of looking at the Bible. And it dawned on me that I could probably teach the Bible like I taught one of the books in my American literature course, like Hemingway, or teach it like Faulkner. I could take the same approach, teach it as if it's a work of literature. So that's what I decided to do. And when I decided to do that, I discovered the Bible for the first time. I saw it with new eyes. I saw all of the divergences and discrepancies between the texts and the authors, and saw each author as an individual, not as kind of a robot listening to the voice of the Holy Spirit in their ear. And I could see it all in just a new way. But it's a radical way if you're trying to teach at a Christian college. It's not a good thing to do. Now, the students themselves appreciated my courses, but some of them were conservative students, and they didn't like a few of my lectures in particular. And one that really got them angry was I showed how Matthew's birth account of Jesus and Luke's birth account of Jesus are completely different. You can't put them together. It's not like two aspects of the same story. They're completely different stories. They diverge on almost every point except for Mary, Joseph, and Jesus and Bethlehem. But even with Bethlehem, they don't agree. For example, in Luke, Bethlehem is not their hometown. Nazareth is their hometown. They travel to Bethlehem temporarily and then return immediately. In Matthew, Bethlehem is their hometown, and the Magi, or the wise men, they show up 2 years after Jesus is born, and then Joseph is warned in dreams to go down to Egypt. Right there, those are big divergences in the story. And then he's told he could go back home, but on the way, he's warned not to go back to Bethlehem, and they relocate in Nazareth. So that was one thing. And I also showed in those stories that Matthew's claim that Mary was a virgin was based on a wrong translation of the Hebrew word for young woman in Isaiah 7:14. That there's a Greek version of the Hebrew scriptures called the Septuagint. And in the Greek version, which Matthew was reading, we don't know who Matthew was, by the way, but Matthew didn't know Hebrew. He was reading the Septuagint, and he read in the Septuagint a prophecy that a virgin was going to have a child. But in the original Hebrew scripture, it's just a young woman that's going to have a child. She's of childbearing age, and by the time the child is old enough to eat solid food, all of the problems of King Ahaz would be resolved as far as the encirclement by the Assyrian forces. So I showed that in my lecture, that there's no such thing as a virgin birth. Well, and another lecture I had was that I used A Course in Miracles to uncover a guilt projection in the Apostle Paul. And it led me to agree with John Shelby Spong, who said Paul was most likely a celibate homosexual. And I was able to put all the pieces together on Paul's projections and came up to the same conclusion. So that was one of my lectures too. And the students who didn't like those lectures, they wrote to the president in Vienna and told him he should fire me. But the director in Kiev didn't want to, because they had nobody else to do what I was doing, and everyone liked me anyway. So I was able to keep my job. But the thing that happened at the same time I was offered these Bible courses was I met Carol Howe, who your listeners and viewers will recognize immediately as one of the foremost teachers of A Course in Miracles. And the Course says that there are no accidents in salvation. Those who are going to meet will meet. And this is a great example because just after I left the mission and left the marriage, I was in Kiev, and the mission, the word went out that everyone should not contact me. They should try to isolate me as much as possible. And there was one woman in the organization. Her name was Oksana, and I love her dearly. She had invited Carol to Kiev to do workshops in A Course in Miracles. And the reason she knew Carol was that Rogers Choir and Orchestra did concerts in Orlando, and Carol had gone to one of the concerts and offered to be a host family. And Oksana and her husband Andrei were in her home, so they knew all about Carol. And Carol was there in Kiev at that moment, giving a seminar in A Course in Miracles. So I, of course, went to the seminar. I thought it was completely bizarre what she was telling about channeling and things. I had never heard of channeling before. Maybe that will surprise you, but growing up in a fundamentalist environment, you never would encounter things like channeling. And there were alarm bells going off, and I thought, this is some weird stuff. And I didn't have a copy of the Course or anything, but Carol gave me a copy of her book about healing addictions before she left. And I started reading her book. And eventually, a few months later, the Russian translator of A Course was going to be in Kiev presenting the Russian translation. And Carol gave her a copy of the English version, which everyone will be quite familiar with, the Blue Book. And you can see how well it's been used. And every page, I started studying it just like I studied the Bible. I wrote all kinds of notes and different things, and I was really studying it hard. And the point is that the Course taught me about guilt projections. And I saw those working in Paul, principally in Romans chapter 1. He says that the natural consequence of people rejecting the knowledge of God, that is, becoming an atheist, is that men would start giving their bodies to men and women giving their bodies to women. In other words, the moment you become an atheist, you just become a homosexual. And I thought, well, that doesn't follow at all. It doesn't cut it with me at all. And I realized, that's a guilt projection. See, you don't naturally conclude that. And I thought, it just might be that he's projecting something he hates about himself onto the picture here. And I won't go into all those details. I go into it in my book, but I did uncover one of my guilt projections at the same time. And that had to do with a colleague who I perceived to be arrogant and highly competitive. And I use that word in a negative way, highly competitive. And he just wanted to climb the ladder and all this stuff. I didn't like him at all. And I realized, it just dawned on me, I don't like competitive people because my father was a highly competitive person. And I perceive that negatively because he turned everything into a competition in our family, and just about everything possible. Who could get home from church faster? He would drive a car early to church, and my mother would drive a car later. And on the way home, he would race her to beat her home. Little things like that. Everything was a competition. And it made me feel that being competitive was ugly. Then I realized I'm highly competitive. I'm a competitive person. I have that streak. I like to win. Who doesn't, right? And of course, that's part of the ego. And we know about all that. The ego is the competitive thing. But when you do A Course in Miracles and you really apply it to your life, forgiveness is the process of seeing it in a different way and seeing it with loving eyes. And I began to see that the students at the university said that my colleague was the best business teacher in the university, and they said I was the best teacher in humanities. And the idea was, hey, without you two guys, our university would just be a terrible place. And I thought, well, we complement each other. He's trying to be the best that he can be, and I'm trying to be the best that I can be. I'm not trying to beat anyone about that. I'm just trying to be the best I can be. And I realized that a competitiveness of that nature, trying to be the best you can be, is a good thing because you give the world the best that you can offer. So I forgave myself for being competitive. And then guess what happened? I started to actually like my colleague. I saw him in a different way, and we became really good friends. And he invited me to his place over the weekends, and we would watch films together and just enjoy each other a lot. And he ended up helping me out a lot in personal ways with my children and other things. And that's the power of the Course in uncovering your own projections. Because when you remove the guilt that you see inside, you clean up your mirror and you start to see the world with loving eyes. And it's a step-by-step process of finding all these areas, cleaning them up, and then more and more seeing the love that's out there. And that's the Course in essence, I would say. But now I've gone on for quite a while. Tell me, is there a direction you'd like to take this at this point?
So yeah, we much of what you've told we heard in the previous podcast episode as well. So we got maybe some new insights about it because you told it from the way you are now, right?
Okay.
The way you see things now. And
well, the point that point about the Bible courses was that I used a lot of my lecture material as the basis of the work on Calvinism.
Yeah,
and
that makes sense.
A lot of that lecture material went into the book. And then also the things I was learning about healing go into the book at certain points. So I do mention meeting Carol, for example, and then carrying it through as I moved from Kiev to Brussels and had a pretty turbulent, difficult relationship there. And we ended up breaking up. And then I met a wonderful course student in a Facebook discussion group for the course. And she happened to be living in Edmonton, Canada. And we really hit it off very well. She ended up visiting me there. It was wonderful. And I decided to relocate here to Edmonton. And we got married a few months later. And so the book ends with that chapter, how I'm starting to put things together. And I didn't feel comfortable writing a book until I felt I had arrived at a certain level of mastery. As the Course says, you have taught freedom, but you haven't learned how to be free yourself. There's that great line. I might not be quoting it exactly, but you may have taught freedom, but you haven't learned how to be free yourself. And I realized, yes, I've been telling all my students how to be free, the truth that would set them free, etc. But I was still shackled by certain fears and guilt, and still uncovering them. But because my current relationship is so harmonious, it sounds a bit pompous and conceited to say, well, it's a holy relationship, but it's not one of those relationships where it's acrimonious and there's a lot of blame and all that. It's very harmonious, and both of us because we know the course so well, we know that if we're irritated by something, it's probably something inside us that needs some work. And we're not often irritated by much, but it's the thing that, it's about you, not the other person. And I felt that I had achieved a certain sense of mastery in that regard, so that I'm not just giving advice and not practicing what I preach. So
Yeah, that's a beautiful way of describing that. Yeah. So
mhm,
what I was interested, you named these 5 pillars of Calvinism, and
mhm.
it sounded like you were using analytical tools derived from A Course in Miracles to give those pillars names. I don't think that Calvinism has those names for their things. At least it didn't sound like that would be terms from Calvinism. Like,
Well,
but
Calvin himself,
maybe you want to
yeah,
explain.
those are the standard uh, terms for Calvinism by everyone, even though
Okay.
Calvin himself never categorized it that way.
Okay.
The and that was the thing I was curious about in the book. I had been a Calvinist for a long time, but I had never actually read anything by Calvin. You just sort of get it by osmosis from preachers who will preach on a certain topic about uh, unconditional election, for example, or total depravity, original sin. You get all these ideas, but you don't really know where they come from. So I set myself the task, which was interesting to me, was to read Calvin's words himself. And so you go to the institutes that he wrote, which is doctrinal books, or his commentaries on the book of Romans or the book of John, the Gospel of John, and you can actually read where he says these things, but he doesn't codify them. They didn't come till a little bit later, when there were some church councils that met that codified the 5 points. And with that codification, you get the 5 points of Calvinism. That didn't come till later. And then there were divisions or factions within the Reformed Church that didn't agree with all 5, especially the last one, which is called the Perseverance of the Saints. Calvinists, hardcore Calvinists, believe that once God calls you, you have no way of never getting saved. You're saved, and you will persevere to the end because God called you. Whereas the Arminian faction of Calvinism, of the Reformed tradition, would say, yeah, you can lose your salvation. And that was John Wesley's position in England. And there were lots of Calvinists in Scotland and the Netherlands and all that. And what I followed in the book also was how those ideas and those very people went from the Netherlands and formed the Massachusetts Bay Colony. They were Calvinists. And there you get the idea that America is the new Israel. Boston is the city on a hill, the New Jerusalem. And from that, you get the development, which we see very prominent now, which is Christian nationalism, that America was chosen by God to achieve his will in the world. And it's a holy mission, and we see it surfacing so much now on the far right, the Christian nationalists. It's a big deal in the States at this point. But as far as the involvement of the course, the course, which each of these 5 points, you can apply ideas from the course to turn all of those on their head and basically discredit them, which you find a little bit is done in the course, where Jesus talks about how his disciples didn't understand him and they got it wrong. He was trying to teach about this, but they interpret it like that, like the final judgment, right? The final judgment is, you are pure and holy, not you should go to the lake of fire. That's not the final judgment. The final judgment is, you've never left the loving embrace of the Father. So in any case, I was able to see all of that with the points of Calvinism, where they do definitely get it wrong. And it starts with the idea of original sin and total depravity, where there's apparently, was supposedly, a fall from a higher state to a lower state in the Garden of Eden. And I go into the in-depth analysis of why that is not true. On the other hand, I think the story, which is a mythological story, could be analyzed in the terms of the Course to describe our sense of separation from our source of being.
Yeah.
And that makes a lot of sense to me. But I don't think that was the idea of the original author of the myth. And every ancient culture had that myth. And there's always a different interpretation, but it's not about being born in sin and all that stuff and it perpetuating through the entire human race. It's not about that at all. And that's the first misstep, because everything in Calvinism and most of evangelical theology is based on the idea of original sin, and therefore you need a savior to save you.
Yeah.
And there's the first misstep right there.
Yeah, that's a good thing to talk about, right? The last judgment is something I talked about this topic with on another podcast that will be aired soon, about the fact that A Course in Miracles says that we are sinless, we are holy, right? And that's the only conclusion that will come out, no matter what you're saying about yourself, how awful you are, or whatever. The Holy Spirit from within us will put that to rest, right?
Exactly.
So
first,
I
it's
think
like blasphemy, because
yeah,
we feel like, I've done a lot of sinful things in this life.
yeah,
It takes a while for it to really dawn on us that, like the Course says, to be without a body is to be in your natural state. And in that state, which is as we are, as God created us, in that state we are pure and holy.
yeah. It's saying that the permanent is not body, right? Is not a body, and so the permanent is the only thing that lasts. And so that's what's true. That's the truth behind it all, right? So
Exactly. Yes.
yeah. So I think it's really fascinating. All these topics, like you were saying, one of the pillars I think is unconditional something.
Unconditional election. Do you know what that
Election. Yeah, that's what I wanted to ask you. What is that?
Okay. Well, according to Paul, God chooses the people that he wants to give his grace to. And by default, he's not choosing the others. And only those he chooses receive his grace. Okay. That sounds like a normal Christian idea. But when you look at it, Paul says it's not, that choice is not based on anything inside of you that is any good. It's not based on God's knowing that when you are offered the gift of salvation, that you will accept it. It's not based on any condition inside of us, hence unconditional. There's no condition inside us that God will see, oh, maybe there's a little bit of them that's good, so I'll offer them salvation or not. No, God just looks down through the corridors of time, and he knows who the people are that will receive his grace. That's it. It's foreknowledge. He just knows those people. Someone made a cute little comment these days, where you see a lot of protests and things where it says Black Lives Matter. Someone made a cute little comment, a play on words on that, is for Calvinism, it's some lives matter. So not everyone's going to receive this offer. In fact, the majority of humanity doesn't receive it, and there's nothing you can do about it. And the point here is that you have a sense of being powerless, and that there's nothing you can do to affect anything good about yourself. And that's a very toxic idea about yourself, to see yourself as in no power at all about what you can do.
Mm.
And the message of the Course and other channeled sources would say that you are the creator of your reality. You're a powerful creator. And the Course even hints at the type of creators we are, which are of similar nature to the divine creator. So there's a lot of power, and we can achieve a lot of things once we access our power to do so. Now, there's a big controversy or disagreements in the Course community about how much we should care about what happens here in this physical dimension. But my feeling is that we're probably here to experience our power in a way that we could not experience it in a different physical dimension or in a different dimension of consciousness. So there's a very specific reason we decided to come here. And at first, we start with the ego complex of ideas, the egoic matrix, and feel powerless and feel separated from the source of our being and the source of our power. But gradually, as we undo the ego, the egoic matrix, we enter our power and we can create beautiful things here. And there's something in the Course called what's it called? The beautiful dream.
The happy dream, I think it's
Happy
called.
dream. That's it. Yeah, like, yeah, we're dreaming. Okay. But why should we always have nightmares? We could actually have happy dreams and create the happy dreams for ourselves. And I think, why not? As the Course says, God's will for us is perfect happiness. And why shouldn't we start experiencing it here and now? As it says, heaven is a choice. Heaven is here. Heaven is now. And that's something we can really effectuate in our lives by doing the lessons, understanding the text, and really applying it to our lives in a positive way.
Yeah. I think this discussion about whether one should care about the world or not is answered in A Course in Miracles, and I don't know why it's not obvious to many
I agree.
people. It simply is, you take care of the world, right? You need to, because it says just because you're not a body doesn't justify mistreating the body. So the body is the world. So and another quotes in A Course in Miracles that are clear about that is that what you have made, you cannot hate, right? So you have to recognize that you don't hate what you made in order to return home. So so hating the world is not natural to us. We cannot hate what we made in truth. We're not honest with ourselves when we're hating it. So that changes everything, right? And so changing your mind about the world, yeah, what did we think about the world? It's an awful place, right? It's awful. Everything is wrong and nobody cares and blah blah blah, right? So why would not caring, which is a typical ego thing, right, not to care, be the way to go? We need,
Right.
and it also speaks about means and ends need to be the same. So if you want, means and end are the same. So when you're kind, you have kindness, right? Yeah. So give what you want to have. So
Absolutely.
give all to have all. So how do you give all? You cannot reject anything if you want to give all, right? How can you give all if you reject something about yourself? You can't.
Right. That's a good point. And
So
giving,
so
you
so
know, if
yeah.
you want more joy, want more love, you have to give it to experience it.
Yeah. And teach what you want to learn is another thing from A Course in Miracles that
Absolutely.
focuses on that. So I have, from my understanding of A Course in Miracles, there's no way that ignoring the world would make sense.
Yeah, there's a
it does say we're not the world, we're not the body, but it also says we're wrong when we think all is awful, right? Because it's a wrong, because why else would A Course in Miracles say you can't change the world, you need to change your mind about the world? So what we think about the world is wrong according to A Course in Miracles.
Yeah.
Right. So we need to change our mind about it. And the only way that it can be something joyful is to love it. Love the world, not because you want to change it, but because you made it. And that's the only way that you own it and you can change your mind about it. Right. And then you have another outcome because of the change of mind in your experience. And it also says what you said, you move from the nightmare, you could call it, or hell experience of the world to a happy dream, as the world is called, right? A dream. So from a nightmare dream to a happy dream, then it shifts to the real world, as it's called, right? And then from there, the last step is something that comes from within. You have when you're ready for it, you shift to heaven, right?
Right.
And so, but that's not something, it's something that comes naturally. It's not something you're in charge of. When that time has come, then that shift happens. And
yeah.
So
exactly.
I see no reason that we could be right about hating the world. And
Yeah.
so, and that's also what I got when I had these insightful experiences.
Yeah.
I'm hating society. I'm blaming society for all my problems. I'm this and that. And the experience was saying all is beautiful, all is wonderful, and all are working together in perfect harmony, right? Now, okay, the Course in Miracles also says that, right? All is working together for your good. And if you knew who planned everything and how much that source knows about you, right, and knows what is good for you, knows everything, right, you would not doubt, you wouldn't even have the possibility of doubting the happiness that is yours, right?
Yeah, that comes from my favorite lesson 135. But you could also view it in terms of states of being. Your state of being determines everything. And the Course says that we only have two emotions, fear and love. Fear we created, and love comes from the divine source. But the thing is, when you're in a state of fear, you are contracting. And this is something Carol Howe first told me about. You're like a turtle and you go in your shell. You're not, when you're in a state of love, now I'm not talking about being in love, but the state of love is a state of extension.
Yeah.
You're extending yourself. And I have a great story about that, how my state of being determined something that happened to me on a very terrible day. Back in 2016, there were the terrorist attacks in Brussels, and the bombs were going off in the airport and in the metro. I almost was in the metro, but not at that station. I don't want to be overly dramatic, but I was on my way to the metro at the time when they closed the metro because of the bombs. Now, I was in a really good state of being in 2016. I was single and enjoying my freedom, feeling really jubilant about running my life and cooking my meals because I love to cook, and really feeling great. And because the metro was closed, I had to walk to my teaching assignment, to my school, and it's quite a long walk. And so I started walking, and along the way, I started meeting my students who were also walking to the school. And we realized, hey, you're safe. You're okay. We were hugging and just so happy, and that we were okay. And then because the public transportation and generally transportation was all closed that day, there was a string quartet ensemble from London who were stranded in Brussels. And they were friends with my housemate, her sister was in that ensemble. And two of the guys from the ensemble stayed over at our house. They were these witty, intelligent, fun British guys who were musicians. And we went out to dinner, and they told me all kinds of gossip about the orchestras they play in and the conductors, and so many funny stories. And at the end of the day, even though bombs were going off and there was a lot of tragedy, me personally, I had a great day. I had a wonderful, happy dream, you know. And no matter where you are, in whatever situation you're in, as long as your state of being is of such like that, what kind of things are going on probably won't affect you in the same way as they're affecting the other people. And I can't speak for people right now who are going through difficult times in Ukraine, for example, which is dear to my heart, having lived there for 7 years. I can't speak to what they're going through and what lessons they are learning through all this. The only thing is, I can say, given and based on the feedback from my friends who are going through it, my Ukrainian friends, that they are experiencing unity and love from their fellow Ukrainians and from many people around the world in a way that they've never experienced it before. And there's always two ways of looking at things. I certainly hope the conflict ends as soon as possible in the best possible way. But these kinds of things are happening right now. And here in Edmonton, we have the largest Ukrainian diaspora in the world. And here in Canada, there's Ukrainians everywhere. And, everyone's reaching out and cooperating and working with relief aid and sending things over. So there's been a real outburst of connectedness and unity because of it. And as long as your state of being, you maintain it and work on your inner peace, you will experience more connectedness with people around you and more love.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite topics at the moment is equality.
Okay, great.
So that's something I talk about a lot because Yeshua's having me write about it as well. So I have a whole book in the works about it. So this
equality in what regard? Equality of race, or?
It's called Remembering That We Are Equal. I can tell you the title. Remembering We Are Equal, A Journey from the Devastation of Specialness to the Joy of Equality. A Course in Miracles and Its Life-Saving Qualities, scribed for Yeshua by Wanaka Oberhuber. So that's the title of the book.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is so it's not about race. Is just one topic you can talk about, but it's not about that.
Right. I didn't think that, actually.
So I have had guests who spoke about healing racism. For instance, I had a wonderful guest who's into A Course in Miracles and was speaking about healing racism. So I have guests from various communities, or one of my guests had described herself as gay, right? And so yeah, we talk about all these things, right? But it's not directly the topic of the book in the sense that I will. Right. I don't know. Maybe later on, Yeshua will have me write about the specifics. I don't know. Right now, it's a lot more about the principles and giving some parables or stories to exemplify that.
That also pertains to the book I wrote about Calvinism, because it is part of what I call the separation paradigm. that there's insiders and outsiders. And the insiders receive God's grace and salvation. The outsiders receive his wrath and condemnation.
Yes.
And he often asks the insiders to help him out to deal with the outsiders. We see that in the Bible, many ways, where Israel is asked to exterminate people around various races around them. Of course, we know that that's not really God talking. It's just humans justifying genocide.
Sodom and Gomorrah is another example.
Yeah, it's
the flood. The flood
yeah.
is another example of God's wrath as described in the Bible.
Many examples. But the thing about, if you're in a Calvinist mentality, you're always separating people into categories. As an evangelical, I would have said, okay, now is Wanico, is he saved or unsaved? Is he a believer or not a believer? I'm always trying to figure out this. And everyone you meet, should I try to save them? Should I offer them the gospel? You're always making these separations of people in your mind. And when you finally drop all that, you meet everyone as your equal.
Yeah.
There's my equal.
That's it.
You're not in a different category than me. Visually speaking, we react to difference in various ways, male, female, race, color, skin, whatever it might be. But once you get into the core, we are absolutely equal. That's the equality we have, that unity. It's all the same. So, yeah.
So it's only our special functions that show differences, not who we actually are, because we're all equal and we're all one. So we're actually not separate in truth. So this is really an amazing topic to talk about, and I've been talking about it lately a lot. So.
See, that word special gets a bad reputation in the course by many course students. Oh, specialness. All right. We don't want that aspect of the word special, but the course does say over and over that you need to ask the Holy Spirit what your special role is in the atonement.
Exactly.
And in your case, it's what you're doing. In my case, it's what I'm doing.
Exactly.
So special is not a bad thing in terms of finding out what you do best and how it can be used in the general awakening that's going on.
Yeah, but it's not to reform someone.
No.
So that's the big difference. That's a big thing, you know. I remember when we were studying, there was this, they were teaching us about, you know, how racism and these things came about and things like that. And one of the topics was how the church handled colonization.
Oh, well. Huh.
Yeah, and there was this huge debate, right? There were two. The one faction was saying, okay, they're animals, basically, all the others, right? So we can do whatever we like. It belongs to us. And and then there was this other church guy who was saying, okay, they are only human because they can be converted to Christianity, right? Okay, he won, right, in the end, but the atrocities that were lived in order to convert these others into Christianity, and this idea that they really had the rights to do all of that was there anyways. So the second one wasn't good either, right? It just was a different way of perpetrating this attack on fellow beings.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so I think this is a really important topic, the equality and this entitlement. You were saying in Calvinism, okay, only those are chosen. And of course, in Miracles is saying the opposite, all are chosen.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, that makes sense. If there is only one child of God, how can anyone not be chosen, right? Because in A Course in Miracles it says there is only one child of God, right? So that's all. That's everything. right?
That's a great example of a biblical allusion in the Course, and there are many. And sometimes Course students get they stumble a bit on that one. When it says in the Course that God has one Son, right?
Yes.
Then in the same paragraph, it talks about all the sons of God.
Yes.
Now, that is a reference to Israel. Israel in the Hebrew scripture is God's one son.
Yes.
But it's a
The
reference.
church, so to speak, in other
Well,
words,
that's
later on.
it's a
Yeah.
Jewish Hebrew scripture thing, in the sense that Israel is God's one son, metaphorically, but Israel is not one thing. It's many. The nation of Israel in the Hebrew scriptures was comprised of millions of people.
Yeah.
So sometimes course students stumble on that idea that, oh, there's just one. No, it's metaphoric that all the creations of God are his one offspring.
Yes.
You see?
Yeah.
But there is individuation within that big family. Because I'll tell you, I'm not very good at science or math or whatever. I'm better at the arts. But
Yeah.
we need everyone else in this big happy family to apply what they can apply to the atonement. And
Yes. And we're walking each other home, as it says, and there's many other metaphors used in A Course in Miracles to describe that.
yeah, that's one
So
point of tangency. Sorry, I interrupted. You were
yeah,
going to
so
say.
that's why I was saying the special function is another one of those allusions to that being unique is correct. It's not wrong to be unique, right? It's right. It's
What
absolutely intentional.
absolutely.
And that's where I'm so surprised lately. I've been seeing all these posts that we're all the same about in course circles on Facebook. I've been seeing these posts about, or other people speaking about it that way. I can understand that they use those words for something totally different, but I wouldn't use same to describe that, because for me, we are diverse, we are unique, everyone is unique, everything is unique, not because it's separate, but because we are one, because we are equal.
Exactly. I mean, just think of the entity that we call Jesus. Now, Jesus became enlightened and he discovered all this and really had an experience of it. Now, if we are all the same on that level, why don't we all just experience it? One individuated member of the sonship experienced it and can tell us that it's there, right? If there were no individuation, then we would all experience it at the same time. So it's really a question of your status or rank in the sonship. We all have equal status.
Yes.
But that doesn't mean we're all equally talented in one thing or another. Your talents are different than mine, and we can extend that to everyone else.
Yeah, and the beauty of it is it's also described. We all can make the same choices, not in the expression, but in the basics, right? In the fundamentals of it, right? So we can choose happiness, right? Everyone can choose happiness. Everyone deserves perfect happiness. It's actually the will of God that you are perfectly happy, as you described it before, which A Course in Miracles does as well.
Yeah.
So this is a really important thing, just because, okay, Jesus or Yeshua or whatever names we use, he had that realization, right? And he was able to give the Holy Spirit, right? Give, but the Holy Spirit was not in the sense that it was his to give alone, but it was something that's in all of us. So he was simply making it visible, right? Reminding us it's there, right? Like you said. Yeah.
The other expression in the course is, you are entitled to miracles.
Exactly.
And so is everyone else, you know. And it's hard for people who don't study the course, when they hear the word miracle, they're thinking poof, Shazam, you know, and all that stuff. But it's those moments when you recognize the absolute connectedness of everything and the person you're with, and that always brings joy.
Yes.
Feeling of connectedness always brings joy.
Yeah, and I think one of the beautiful things that says about the world or about the body is its only purpose is communication, and the communication's purpose is to recognize our oneness.
Yeah.
Right. So
that's right.
So to accept the atonement for ourselves, right? In other words, another word of A Course in Miracles. So this is really powerful. So if you say, if you are, we were talking about how some people say we need to ignore the world, but if the world's purpose is to communicate our oneness, right? When you see it that way, oops, we can't ignore the world. We can only thrive by listening, right?
Yeah.
By giving, right?
Yeah, I think this physical dimension is probably one of the darkest and densest physical dimensions in the universe of consciousness. And we come here to experience that, and then to find the light in the darkest place. Now that's exciting. If you're, let's say you're rich, like some of these mega billionaires, it's not exciting to find money on the ground, right? You have all you need. But for me, I'm not rich, and I watch my budget carefully. I have this thing where I find large amounts of money on the ground, and it just gives me a huge thrill. Since I moved to Canada, I've found $100 bill twice on the ground. So, and that's a whole issue about why am I finding it? And maybe I'm in some parallel reality. That's why I'm finding it. I don't know. But the point is, for me to find $100 on the ground is really exciting. But for Bill Gates or somebody, you know, who has a lot of money, it probably wouldn't be so exciting. And the thing is, when we come here to this dark place, when we finally discover the light in a dark place, how much more joy. It's all through contrast. What's the German word Gegenteil?
Yeah.
Gegenteil,
Anyways, yeah, Gegenteil is
contrast.
also a word in German. That's
Exactly.
opposites, but it's opposites.
Yeah.
Gegenteil, the opposite. So,
Right.
anyways, yes, A Course in Miracles also speaks of learning through contrast.
Yeah.
So it acknowledges that.
Exactly.
As well.
Yeah.
So it's very interesting how one can get caught up and think that that's, and also the issue of sameness, right? It's not about that, right? And so yes, there can be, we are all entitled, right? We are all entitled because of who we are, because of our, yeah, we are extension of the creator, right? As it says in A Course in Miracles. So we cannot be different, right? And so this dream is a dream of separation, yes. But when you allow the Holy Spirit to reinterpret it, then it communicates unity and not separation, because it cannot be different than the extension of source, right? So even what we've made cannot in truth illustrate separation, right? It can appear to do that because of how we've interpreted it and what we think about it,
Mm-hmm.
been thinking about it, but it cannot do that in truth. So in the end, the reinterpretation actually shows us it's not a reinterpretation, it's a return to the truth of it, right?
Right.
But
That's
so
something that, of course, talks about the real world.
yes,
Well, we come here to be an illusion, but when we discover that the real world can be experienced here, we let the truth lead us to it. And I think that refers to the connectedness of everything.
yeah,
Uh, and the physical world is not real in that sense. But the when we see in the Course to say your body is not real or the world is not real, I think what it means is it's not physically real like you used to think it was. Even science is telling us that what looks solid is not really solid. So it's
right,
not what you thought it was. It's actually something else.
yes,
Perhaps let's call it energy in motion or vibrational energy or whatever. But that's another big topic for Course students to talk about, and probably not for today, you know.
yeah. We can tie up once again on this topic of states of mind. When I was studying anthropology, we had this course about religious and consciousness studies as well, these lectures. And the professor was speaking of Charles Tart, who said one would need a different science for every state of being that you're in. So depending on which state of being you're in, or of mind, you would actually need a totally different handbook of techniques
Very interesting. Yeah.
and so on. So I used that in my master's thesis as well.
Very good. Yeah,
So
that's an interesting point.
so I think that's another way of describing that. Depending on how you see the world, you have a totally different experience. And,
Absolutely.
and what I think the Course is saying when you were describing that is that the world is not what we think it is, and
Exactly.
we are not what we think we are, right?
Absolutely.
So I think that's a difference to many metaphysical teachings that say, you can create whatever you want. And A Course in Miracles is not about creating whatever you want. It's about recognizing that you are not what you think you are, right? And then remembering what you actually are, right? By uncovering that.
Yeah, I mean, you could turn it around slightly in a cute way to say the Course is helping you decide what you really want.
Yes, it's
Right?
giving you back your free will.
Do
It's
you
giving
want the
back your
peace of
free will.
God? Do you want to be happy? Do you want the peace of God? That lesson in the workbook always hits me between the eyes because I say, well, of course I want the peace of God. But it says no one has truly said it and meant it, right?
Yeah.
If that was true, then the world wouldn't exist. It would just be finished for that. Wouldn't need it anymore. But anyway.
Yeah. So we just it points to the fact it's not saying that doesn't say necessarily it does say it that the world disappears, right? But not in the sense that it's the world we think what we think the world is disappears. This idea of separation, we do not know what that is like at this point because we are misinterpreting it anyways,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Right.
So
Yeah.
so it's not it we don't know what that we just know the only thing we know about it is all the pointers point that out is that you're perfectly happy in heaven, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Everything points to that, but we do not know what that looks like because the senses that we're using, the interpretations that we're using at this point do not apply.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
So yeah, it's quite exciting. I mean, to think that you can there's so much to discover, right? Because of who you are, you have infinite discovery at your fingertips.
The deeper
To,
you go into it, the more it makes a difference.
yeah.
Um,
And extending love, right? Extending love is never finished. So it's always fresh.
exactly.
And so that's where, you know, people say, okay, peace is boring, right? And
No.
I discover, oops, that's what I thought. Yes, I thought that myself, right? I've been thinking that plenty of times, that peace is boring or this and that,
Mhm.
whereby I must admit I was not the type of person to be bored. So I may be exaggerating about that. But anyways,
Yeah.
so but peace is in the way A Course in Miracles describes it, is dynamic, is fascinating, is absolute continuous extending of love. So you're always creating, you're always infinitely creative. So
Mhm.
that's why it also says give all to have all, because it's never ending. You know, we have all these ideas, there's an end. You know, you can only go so far in your creativity. You can only be so much a genius, right? And then there at some point it's over, right?
Yeah.
But everything that speaks of that, you realize, no, the opposite is true. The more you give, the more there is to give,
Mhm.
right?
That's right. Mhm.
And so that's a big lesson to learn, you know, because we're afraid of giving everything, right? And
Mhm.
so
Yeah.
okay, if I give my best ideas away now, right? I give them all away, then I won't have any more to give, right?
Yeah.
So if
Yeah.
someone then grabs those ideas and takes them and expands on them, and excels at that, I have lost everything, right? That's
Right.
right. So I have nothing left. But in truth, you get more. And not only that, still belongs to you. You don't lose it, because A Course in Miracles says an idea never leaves its source. So you
That's
not
right.
only do you not lose it, no matter how many people might do something with it, you
Mhm.
are not losing it.
And it gets strengthened as you share it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is a big learning lesson,
Mhm.
because this idea of scarcity of ideas, scarcity of invention, scarcity of creativity, and so on, is holding us all back.
Mm. Yep. Absolutely. The
So
belief in scarcity and lack. Mhm.
so we're losing so much because of that.
Mhm.
So I think what you're pointing out also in your book about Calvinism is that by changing your mind, right, about it, you actually can give all. You can give so much more.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And to this idea, you know, of, oh, there's only these elect few, um,
Yeah.
has led to so much controversy and so much infighting, right?
Mhm.
And I'm right and you're wrong, right? Well, A
Mhm.
Course in Miracles is saying the opposite. Okay, if you want to be happy, you need to live with not being right. And so,
Yeah.
so
It's
you,
a hard one to get through.
so okay, thank you. I am wrong about everything. Yay, that's so good.
Yeah.
Because
Because you are. Yeah.
then it can be all replaced by the Holy Spirit's interpretation.
Mhm. Exactly. And we are not our beliefs. We are something greater.
Yeah, we're not our beliefs. That's not who we are. Who we think we
Exactly.
are is not who we are.
Mhm. Yeah.
So the beauty is, yeah, who we are was never in peril in the first place. That's another message from A Course in Miracles.
Yeah. That's right.
So, yeah. Anything you would like to share before we wrap up?
Well, we've covered a lot of things, and I can't think of anything offhand. I mean, we could talk about the course for several more hours, and so there's lots to talk about there. But I think everyone has the general idea, first of all, of the book. If it's really targeted to people who are questioning their beliefs or have been through it and still don't quite know how to put two and two together. And I try to help them see everything in a better way, more loving way, see themselves in a loving way, which is essentially what the course is trying to do too. But it's not the book is not about the course. That's it. The ideas of the course inform my perspective, but I didn't want it to be a course book. It's what we would call a deconstruction book, which is a very hot topic these days. A lot of people are starting to question their fundamental beliefs and moving to a different place, and that's the design of the book, what it's designed to help people do. And thank you so much for letting me talk about the book and myself. I'm not used to talking about myself so much, honestly.
Yeah, that's another thing is giving all is includes talking about oneself.
Yeah.
And that's something we tend to hold back a lot, right? Especially in public. So
But in my classroom, students always told me they appreciated the most were when I told stories about myself.
yeah.
And when I'm working with somebody, let's say coaching or counseling, I don't talk about myself hardly at all because that's not the point. I want them to tell me what's going on. But this is one opportunity where I sort of have to tell my story, and I hope some people will find it interesting. But even if not, the book is doing well initially, and it's for as a new offering on Amazon. It was #1 in its category for several days, so that's very gratifying too. But if people want to find me, they can find me on Facebook. That's where I'm most active.
Okay.
And if they want to find me, find the book, or chat or whatever, that's the place to find me.
Okay, great. You'll give me the links and I'll put it in the show notes.
Okay.
So you
Great.
can put the link to your book as well if you want.
Okay, very good.
Yeah.
Great. I appreciate that.
Yeah, so this is a really great way to share and to get the background of the author of the book is also very, very gratifying. So
Yeah.
I think that's really beautiful, that you were willing to share your stories and some of your experiences and insights on top of talking about the book. But you said it's also a lot of it is in the book as well. So
Yeah, there's the book is designed sort of with a parallel narrative. There's the 5 major chapters on Calvinism, and above and in between each section and after are my autobiographical vignettes telling where I've been at certain places in my life and how they sort of apply to that point in Calvinism. So it's a parallel narrative in that regard. And because I didn't feel I could just write a book about my life, why would anyone care, and also I have a doctorate in music history, so why would anyone trust what I have to say about theological things? But I had to tell that much of my story that people could say, oh yes, he's had a lot of exposure and experience with theological things, so that they could trust what I have to say about that. So I thought that was an important thing to do in the book.
yeah, it's that's another thing about entitlement. Sharing your story is valid and is valuable.
Yeah.
And to have perspectives on things that other people would say, okay, I'm not the expert, I'm not allowed to share, is also valid.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's so funny, some people with A Course in Miracles, we have the same thing. There's these various ways of teaching A Course in Miracles. Some are totally into every single paragraph, and they'll read the paragraphs and then they'll talk about it and this and that, or others will have studied another, like Ken Wapnick or some other teacher, and will be citing those ideas alongside course passages and so on.
Mm-hmm.
So there's many different styles. And for instance, in my case, I was surprised. I got the message, you're a teacher of A Course in Miracles, and I hadn't read the book. So
okay.
so it comes in many ways. right?
Yeah.
And so I think you are entitled to write this book, right? And your book is important. And I encourage everyone to do that, right? To share, to really extend love in whatever way is you are ready for at the point you are at, right?
Yeah. Right. I didn't want to pretend to be a Hebrew scholar or a Greek scholar. I'm just sort of an informed reader, let's put it that way, so that I don't pan myself off as the expert on this and that. But from what I have studied and done research on, I can stand by that. That's all right.
Yeah. And that's important, when you make you share where you're coming from, where you got this from, and so on, and that's all you need to do. It's not about comparing all of that.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's the beauty of it. So thank you so much for sharing all of this. And
Thank you.
like I said, I encourage anyone who's willing to share. So that's why I have so many different guests on the podcast. I give you all space to share, right?
Yeah, you're a wonderful host. You're very gracious.
Yeah, so that's something that's important to me. And it's also one of the reasons, I guess, is because I've been learning that lesson myself, right?
Yeah.
To feel comfortable with sharing and to realize the value of that.
Well, you certainly do create that wonderful atmosphere in your podcasts, and like I said, you're a very gracious, kind host, and that makes people feel comfortable talking. So you're doing a great job at your special role in the atonement, right?
Thank you very much. Yeah. So
Okay.
thank you so much.
Thank you
for your time, for your willingness to share, both in this interview and in the previous interview that we had. So if people want to hear what has changed in the way you describe your story, they might want to compare it.
I don't know. We don't want to tax their patience.
No, I'm not saying that it's exactly the same, because there's aspects that you described in greater detail. Yeah. There's things you described in much greater detail in our previous conversation.
All right.
So, it's not exactly the same. But of course, our stories tend to be the same story, right? It's not like we have completely different stories over time, but things have developed and there's more. So I thank you so much for being willing to step out into the public and share.
Yeah, big pleasure. Thank you.
And I'm very thankful for everyone who does that, because it simply enriches us all to have these conversations.
Yeah.
Okay, so I thank all listeners. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. Please recommend the podcast to people, review it, and subscribe. And I would really be happy to have any of you who are willing to share your message of love to come on the podcast as well. I do my best to accommodate and to have a wonderful, place for us to share our love, right? So thank you so much, and till next time.